something you never done seen. Swaggy but still an MC. My guilty conscience, that bitch just keep on talking. Say you're not touching the thing, you rash boys. Probably gon' sing for the moment. Fuck the police when it's me and my team. Pussy that's bad means give a life word to the 313.
Hey, what is up, guys? This is Platinum Point, and I'm here to bring you guys yet again another Weiss Schwarz video. This time it's going to be part of a mini series that I would like to do since we're at the beginning of a new competitive season, and this is going to be something I'm going to be regularly doing when we enter each stage of the season. So the first one that we're going to be focusing on is going to be on the Bushiroad Rumble Online, which is coming up this coming August, and I wanted to list some of the decks that are going to be that you might expect to play during the online Rumble. And for this part, this is going to be part one, where I'm going to be discussing five major decks that you may encounter while playing in the online season. So if you want to practice now, here are some of the decks that you can kind of expect to face against. So before we begin, I just want to talk about some of the purpose of this video. So the purpose of this video is to help prepare you guys for these matchups that you may encounter, as well as just a little disclaimer that these decks that I'm going to be discussing, or the decks that I discuss on this video, are going to be based on my evaluation of the data provided to us by the Weiss Tea Time on the Spring Fest season, as well as the meta trends in Japan, as some of these decks are not only meta relevant here but also meta relevant in Japan. So these are just my opinions based on my educated investigation and just my research and deck testing as well. So please do not take my words as gospel, but rather just my opinions, and this is just here to help people prepare for this event and to help you with your playtesting as well. So the first deck that I'm gonna be discussing is a variant of Marine that's in the Hololive production, which is known as the Kanata Marine deck. So in Japan, this deck is actually one of the more dominant builds of the Hololive production set, as it allows you to kind of take advantage of building compression via stock soul, as well as rushing your opponent generically by just slamming climaxes and pushing for damage in the early game. And how it does this is that it forgoes a traditional level 1 climax combo in favor of this early play climax combo, which allows you to either stock 2 cards from the waiting room or salvage up to 2 cards. So this allows you to essentially build up your resources and compress, as well as depending on the number of times you play this climax combo repeatedly throughout the game. And the goal of that deck is to basically just accrue your resources in order to successfully land the 3/2 Marine finisher. So one of the strengths that this deck does have is that it does have the ability to rush your opponent in the damage game early game. And at level 2, it's gonna wall out using the 3/2 Kanata and by spamming that combo, they're gonna try to replenish their hand as they wall you out, as well as if they have successfully walled you out without using their hand, they will spam that climax combo in order to compress their deck. And the purpose of that is, by compressing their deck, they're able to, upon refresh, mitigate the number of instances of damage that they may take. And since Marine is such an efficient finisher, it pairs really well with this deck, as the Marine tends to pay for itself. And in order to play this Marine, you can essentially sack one of your Kanatas in order to trigger the effect to top 3 check. And by doing so, you not only gain a card from your hand, but it also refunds itself the 1 stock. So you can slam another one if you have more than like 4 stock. So this allows you to triple lane the Marine and successfully land the climax combo. The problem with this deck, though, is that it needs to hit level 2 first in order to pop off. If you do decide to hit it at level 2, I do have one caveat though, is that you can hit it to level 2 early if they're very low on stock, because in order for them to truly take advantage of that lane is if they can field at least 2 to 3 of the Kanata in their initial run at level 2. If they're unable to do that, they're pretty much in a very precarious situation where they will essentially be trying to burn as much resources in order to try field it, and if they don't have enough stock and they can only field one, they're essentially one for oneing, which is not good, especially if they're committing so much resources in their hand. And that's the biggest thing why they want to slam 2 to 3 on the board, is that it allows them to replenish their hand on the first run, and on the second run, that's when they start to, if they can, spam that climax combo, build their stock back up. And because they're a stock compression strategy in terms of that, they're very susceptible to a well-timed stock swap. So if they build up way too much stock, and if you see the player not paying out their stock enough, you can essentially punish them by just doing a well-timed stock swap. Another thing is that their early game plan requires them to use their on death Rickies, which is the Aqua and the Aki Rose. And if you can prevent them from hitting the waiting room via stock bombing, clock bombing, or even bottom deck bombing at the level 0 step, you pretty much derail their early game and make it very harder for them to reestablish their board, since they're going to be try fielding every turn if they can, which means they're going to be burning resources from their hand. So if you can win the resource game with this deck, you can put this deck in a very precarious situation where you actually have a higher chance of winning. Hence why this deck does have some weak spots. Another one is anti-early play techs like anti-early play backups that shove it to the bottom, that shove the Kanata to the bottom, or even putting into stock or clock makes the strategy very difficult for them to crack back. And if you can break their board, it's very hard for them to recover if they didn't salvage the right pieces on the previous turn with their climax combo. So if you prevent them, if they don't salvage all their pieces to set up for the next turn, all you have to do is have a well-timed disruption on their board via either bottom deck bombs. I know the Watame and Hololive is used in the matchup to bottom deck the Kanatas. You can even level them down, and if you can somehow crack their board efficiently, you are able to just control the game there, because their strategy requires that the 3-2 Kanata stay on board, and if the Kanata isn't on board, you pretty much win the game. So here's a sample deck list that I was able to get from Weiss Tea Time. So there are other deck lists out there on their master post for the BCF, so that's one resource that I chose to look at. Another one that you can look at is Kilua's blog, and I'll put a link in the description to his blog post so you can see what some of these deck lists and how they operate in Japan. Because oftentimes if our decks are shared across the sea, across the metas, we will tend to defer to Japanese, and oftentimes the Japanese metagame tends to help us solve some of the deck building issues early on. And so this one's actually from Weiss Tea Time. I think this is from the 3rd place Australia Springfest. Don't quote me on that. You can check it out on the Weiss Tea Time Springfest post, and you can find this deck. Another deck that we're gonna be discussing is obviously the boogeyman of the metagame, which is going to be 8 Standby Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. So this deck is basically the new boogeyman for Standby, the new bugbear, in which we have to kind of just play around. And in fact, most of the decks are going to be catered towards dealing with this deck specifically, as this is definitely going to be probably the majority of your matchups. If you do play at the Bushiroad Online Rumble, you might face quite a bit of these Mushoku Tensei decks. You might even face this at the Bushiro the BCS tournaments following the online rumble. So what this deck does really well is using the standbys to set up 1/1s and 2/2s to help win those lane trades. The Roxy Brainstorms in particular allows them to turn their climaxes into +1 souls in the form of giving one character the pay 1 twin drive, which allows them to not only clean their stock out for any standbys triggered on the previous attack, but it allows them to push for more soul damage. So you can potentially face lanes where they're going to be hitting for 2, maybe 3 points of damage. So don't be surprised when you see the Mushoku player on pawn twin driving hitting you for 3 or even 4 damage, depending on the character. Another thing that makes this deck really bonkers is the 3/2 Ghislaine is pretty much a non-interactive finisher. You cannot, when they attack you, you cannot play events or backups against that card. So they effectively just get to win the lane as well as push for damage, which is just incredibly insane since it's not only essentially a 16k body during their turn, but it's also an on-play heal. So their goal is to just tri-lane this, win all 3 lanes upon slamming the Ghislaine climax. So you got to be prepared. And also another thing that makes this deck very difficult to play against is that they have really good defensive options in the form of the 2/1 rest counter Rudius, as well as the 3/2 Paul, which has the reflect on cancel, basically on cancel reflect Musashi, which is if you cancel the damage, you mill a soul trigger, then you can pay the cost, which is discard a card from their hand and reflect that same amount of damage back to your opponent. So be careful about when playing against that matchup. As a defensive option, they will sometimes double lane on the sides specifically. That's from what my experience is, the 3/2 Pauls when they trigger their standbys. So be careful about that matchup because that Paul is a real doozy on the defense. So because it essentially rewards them for canceling by essentially shooting that damage back at you. One of the weaknesses that this deck does have is that once you do crack that board, aka once you beat it in battle, which is if you can climb over their power thresholds, it's very hard for them to reestablish that board. Hence why a lot of the recent builds have been shoving in the 2/2 Eris as their secondary standby target for level 1, as most of the time the Ghislaine 2/2s are only going to be at 9k, maybe 10k, and if you can crack those two, they're very hard for them to recur that advantage. And with the 2/2s, at least if they lose that battle, they can discard encore it. So they're starting to really adapt to that kind of flaw that they have, which is if the board is cracked, it's very hard for them to recover. So they're playing standby targets that essentially, even if it's gone, you can still play the game. Also, if you're playing a 1k 1 soul, one thing that you can do from my experience playing this deck is that if you rush them really early and put them in awkward situations, for example at level 1, if you can rush them early before they hit low, before they can build enough stock to hit level 1, like for example, and one way is if you hit them to level 1 while they have 1 card in stock, you essentially kneecap their ability to try lane the 1/1 Eris, because the only way their major way of plussing at the level 1 is using that Eris, their level 1 Eris climax combo to reset, to mill through their deck and salvage the key pieces that they need for the next turn. So if you can lead them, if you can rush them early and take the lead in damage, it's very hard for them to keep up with you. And that's the advantage of traditional 1k 1 soul decks, is that you have the benefit of just outright just leading them in the damage race. So if you have the opportunity, you can essentially like take the lead and potentially win against them if you rush them and damage. Hence why the meme of the +2k soul, the +2 soul is also pretty relevant, as those decks can rush this deck really quickly before they have a chance to set up their boards. And that's the weakness of all board-based decks, is if you rush them and damage before they can set up, it's very hard for them to kind of recover and take back that tempo away from you. Another thing that they're very susceptible to is early play bombs, like the typical 1/1 Adachi bombs, as well as any effects that level down, also really hurt this deck. So if you can have level 1 anti-early play if your deck has level 1 anti-early play strategies, you want to make sure that you have those in your deck, as you can not only use them to threaten your opponent's lanes when they attack via anti-early play backups, but you can also break down their boards using effects like level down or Adachis, and that helps you win that, like make that matchup much easier. Another thing that I didn't mention in this slide that you could possibly do against this matchup is sometimes if you're playing a 1k 1 soul deck and you are in the lead, you could widen your lead by surrendering your lanes, so that when they swing in, they're swinging in large numbers, which forces them to be like to kind of orient their lanes to essentially either continue pushing, like just push through the compression, or swing in with precision damage, which is very hard for a standby deck since they play 2/2s, which will, if they swing in on open lanes, is going to be swinging for at least a minimum of 3 damage. And if you're in a really good compressed state, you can afford to lose those lanes, lose the lane trades. So you have to be very careful and know if your deck can handle losing those lane trades. If you can't, you have to either find a way to tech in cards to break their board, or be willing to play a little bit more aggressive to rush them up. So here's a sample deck list taken from the Weiss Tea Time. I think this is also from the Australia trios. This is, I think, the first place list. Overall, most of them will probably be running a list similar to this. You might encounter ones that don't run this specific 1-0 Eris event right here. So if you do see those, know that they might be focusing more on milling strategies. And if you do, then you would have to just pay attention to the lanes and know when to contest certain lanes. This deck is coming out as of recording Friday. This Friday, Don Machi, is it wrong to pick up girls in a dungeon? So this deck is going to be the kryptonite to all standby decks, as this deck is really good at building up their level 1 game plan, which is to loop this level 1 bell combo, which is essentially the 1-0 Goblin Slayer, which allows you to either search or salvage the Hestia Knife. And this deck essentially runs 12 events in order to build compression, power up lanes in order to crack the opponent's board. And this is from just my observation from what Japan plays. I'm going to be testing this deck personally, and I'm going to be giving you guys my thoughts on it after play testing it. But from what I've noticed when watching this deck's matchup is that it's very stock efficient. It's basically, the goal is, it's similar to Ruby, where you build lanes to break walls, aka board breaking, and then worry about using your resources to rebuild your resources to break your opponent's board again continuously. So it's a board breaking strategy, along with a consistent just deck filtering and consistent continuous deck filtering. So the problem with this deck, however, from what I've looked at the set so far, is And from what other people have told me is that the 3-2 Hestia finisher is not really a good finisher against non-standby or non-board based decks. So it's going to be this Hestia is particularly good against standby decks, as it can pump soul to itself and side for damage, as well as if damage does get canceled, you do have the effect of burn on cancel burn too, which is really nice. So this Hestia is really good against standby boards. But any decks that tend to surrender their boards, this deck has a problem with sticking the damage, as they tend to overswing when they launch their combos, and it has kind of no other way of closing the game other than just this Hestia, which is often unreliable sometimes. And this is just from my impression when I was looking at the deck list. In order to crack these boards, they have to play these 12 events. It can be any combination, but they tend to run 12 events, which means that their deck space is really tight, so they're unable to play like some of the potential off finishers that I've noticed that this deck can run, which is like the 3-2 Wealth, which allows you to like basically on reverse play the 3-2, I think it's the 3-2 event that burns 3 for free. So it's essentially like the Drago Buster Millum, but since they're really tight in space, it's really hard to do so. And even when I begin building this deck, I am going to be looking at finding a way to give that balance, because it does feel like, from just initial examination, this deck does have that issue against fair decks. And since we're in the English metagame, you're gonna encounter a healthy mix of fair decks along with board-based decks. So be conscious about this deck, and if you do decide to pick it up, please be conscious of these weaknesses. If you want a more in-depth discussion on this deck profile, I suggest looking at Burn 1 at the deck profile made by Kit from Burn 1. I'll put a link to the Danmachi video, his Danmachi video, in the link in the description below, because he goes into greater detail about the weaknesses of Danmachi as well as the strengths. I'm still waiting to get my play set, so I'm not that knowledgeable about this matchup, but I just want to bring this up to you guys because this is one deck that people have been kind of hyping up to be kind of the boogeyman against standby. Basically, the deck that will contest it. And here's a sample list that I've seen in the Japanese metagame. This one is provided to us by Kilua's blog post, so I'll put a link in it. Once again, check the description below for a link to his blog post, and you will find deck lists like this. And you can also look at the previous ones that he has of the previous versions of Danmachi, as this is more of a later version, as during this stage in the meta right now, during this stage in the Japanese metagame, Mushoku has kind of decreased in play, so they're not running this exact event configuration. This is just what I found that is relevant right now. So if you want to see previous lists, I would recommend either looking at Kit's list, Burn 1's list, or checking out Kilua's or browsing Kilua's blog. Next, we are going to be talking about Ruby. So this one is particularly my favorite version of Ruby, which is Door Standby. One of the things that Ruby has going for it is that this deck is really good, just like Danmachi, at board breaking, as this level 1 Ruby combo can easily hit 9-5, and if you kind of over invest, you can easily hit 10-5 on one lane. And because this Ruby has the ability on reverse, check up to the top 4 cards of your deck, add a Remnant character, and then give another lane plus 2k, you're able to crack your opponent's board at level 1 very easily, and this deck does it really well. Another thing that this deck has going for it is that the level 1 combo is even usable at level 2, since the Weiss 2/1 can pump the Ruby and give it an additional on reverse. Check the top 2 cards of your deck if they're remnant. Add any remnant characters from among them to your hand. So this card just, that level 1 combo is just going to be usable throughout the game most of the time. And the benefit of this deck is that it just breaks boards like nothing. Another thing is that because this level 1 combo is a Minami combo that mills 4, it has actually pretty good deck speed, and along with their draw brainstorm. Some decks play the mill 5 draw brainstorm, some play the spammable search then discard brainstorm, and then some of them run the mill 4 Nora salvage brainstorm. They also have other mills in the form of the Zwei, which is an on play mill the top 2 cards of your deck. If you mill a climax, then you can pay cost, which is discard a card from their hand and search your deck. Sorry, for a remnant character. So there's a lot of milling in this deck, so it has really decent deck speed. Sorry, but what makes this deck even more bonkers is that the 3/2 Ruby is a non-interactive finisher. It's essentially Megumin from Konosuba, except its requirement is you have to have 2 or more copies of the level 0 Pura in memory. And all you have to do is on climax placement, rest this specific Ruby, the 3/2, and then you can burn 3 and then clock kick. So this gets around anti-early play rest counters, anti-damage counters. But the weak spot of this deck is that, one, the Ruby does not generate stock when it when you launch the climax combo. So you essentially minus 1 stock from you're zeroing out stock, because you're just going to be tapping it with the climax combo. And if the character facing it has hexproof, which sets like AOT have the 3/2 Armin, which gives the characters in front of it hexproof, it makes it harder for them to do the clock kick. They still get to do the burn 3. It's just that it makes it more trickier to close the game, as they're not able to break those 2 lanes. And if you have the 2 3/2 Armins in the back row, which is a little bit of a very hyper those weird the AOT player has to have like the best game ever in order to have 2 3/2 Armins on the back line. But besides the point, if they had that ridiculous board setup, they essentially, Ruby's just gonna be basically swinging for 3. If you can stock bomb, bottom deck bomb, or even clock bomb, essentially prevent that level 0 Pura from hitting the memory or the waiting room, as the 1/0 Pura does get to shove it into memory. If you can prevent it from hitting the memory, basically the 3/2 Ruby cannot launch its climax combo. So that's one of its major flaws. And this deck is not really good defensively, so it's only good at just cracking the lane, cracking the boards, but it's not good at protecting their boards. So if you can swing back and crack their lanes, if they don't have enough resources to consistently reestablish their boards, you essentially can win the game via just out resourcing them. So you have to be careful with that. You have to be conscious about that matchup, and as a Ruby, if you're playing this deck, you want to be conscious about your resources. That's one thing when I was playing Ruby, that you have to be very conscious about your resources when you're playing this particular version of Ruby, as you can lose hand if you don't maintain if you don't get your pluses off, which is which is possible. And then here's a sample deck list again of a Standby Door Ruby from the Springfest Trios. There are other variants of this list. I will be featuring my own variant of this that I might be taking to either the Bushiroad Online Rumble or even the Circuit Series. So I still haven't decided yet. So lastly, the last deck that I want to talk about, this is just my personal favorite deck, and I did see it in the data for Springfest, which is going to be Pants Store Slime. So this deck is basically going to be, you're going to be seeing this, you might see this when you play at the event. In fact, you might see it pop up sometimes in the top 8 if most players don't beat this deck out, because this deck has just a very simple and consistent game plan, which is you build stock and compress via memory in order to just wall up at the 3-2 stage and mitigate your damage. What this deck does in order to build the walls is basically spam out their early plays in the form of the 3-2 Shizu, which has an early play condition that if you have 2 or more of the 1-0 Conqueror of Flames Shizu in memory, you can early play this card. It also can break lanes at the 3-step with the 3-2 Gazelle, which is an on-play bounce, one of your opponent's characters, as well as a top 3 check. I think it's a top 3 check rear range. My memory with this deck is kind of a little bit fuzzy since I haven't been playing Slime that much. This deck is pretty much has a simple strategy, which is you build resources via your level 1 climax combo, as well as taking advantage of the door trigger to replenish your hand, and then basically wall up at level 2 with your early plays to heal down. So your goal is to constantly heal down at level 2 in order to drag your opponent into level 3. And you basically can either kill them with the 3-2 Pursuit Millum. I've seen some lists tech in the Drago Buster event in order to help close the game. So expect this deck, among the other Slime variants, which I will discuss in later videos, to be prevalent in the Rumble Online, as well as in the Circuit Series this upcoming fall. So be very vigilant with this deck and know this matchup. I would suggest, if you wanna, this is probably one of the more consistent fair decks that I've played personally. So one of the weaknesses that this deck does have is that it's very memory reliant, particularly with the 1-0 Shizus. If you can somehow stock bomb it, clock bomb it, or even send it to the bottom of your deck, you can pretty much hamper one of their early play strategies, as that 3-2 does require them to have two or more in memory. And oftentimes it's very RNG, as for it to go into memory, it has to be reversed. That's part 1. And the second part is they have to reveal the top card of your deck, and if that character happens to be a Demon Continent or Anti-Magic Mask, that's the only time they can send it to memory. If they reveal a Climax, it stays on the board and will be heading straight to the waiting room upon Encore step. So it's very RNG reliant, that effect. So be prepared to basically either rely on that RNG or have stock bombs, clock bombs, or even bottom deck bombing level 1s ready to just send this away from the memory. You want to keep it out of the memory. That's your main way of playing against this deck. The problem with this deck too is that it has no clear way of closing the game, which means that their main strategy is just to heal down and then just, in a sense, rush you to soul rush you to death. And if they can't do that, it's very hard for them to close their game. That's why in some builds they do tech in the Drago Buster, because of the fact that their 3-2 Millum is not a reliable finisher. so they need some kind of way to close the game. So they rely on that Milim Dragobuster event to do that. So here's a once again, here's a sample list of Pants Store slime. This is credited to Weiss Tea Time. So if you want to see this list, check out the Weiss Tea Time website. So this is the end of the video. So I just wanted to show you guys that this is, if you guys have other decks that you think are going to be relevant in the metagame for this event, please comment them below and I will probably include them in the next parts. Part 2 is going to be probably popping up in July 22nd, where I'm going to be covering more decks that I think are going to be relevant in the events. The next video that I will be doing after this is going to be a table deck building video, kind of like a table tech of Danmachi. I might live stream it actually, of me building Danmachi as soon as my playset comes in. The reason why I'm going to be doing it that way is because I'm very tactile. I like to do things by hand. So you're going to see me looking through the set again live and building the deck by scratch, along with some references from the Japanese metagame. So I will be showcasing that very soon when my playset comes in. I do have other videos coming in the pipe work. I am working on a collaboration video with my buddy Liam from Weiss and Chill, as well as I'm planning on doing some other collabs yet. I cannot tell you who they are yet. I'm still trying to get sit down and talk with them on planning that. I will be doing more discussion videos in the near future. I have some topics in mind, but some of them might be on things like net decking, as well as overall kind of discussion on ban lists, because I do think we might be in the track to receive another ban list update, and I want to discuss what I think might occur, because I do think Japan this time we might have a different ban list from the Japan ban list. Although I'm not going to hold my breath, because Bushiro did copy the Japanese ban list for the most recent one, so they might copy the JP one over. We just gotta wait and see about that one too. So once again, this is Platinum Point. I hope you guys like this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates. I will be doing more videos like this in the near future. I just wanted to do a pilot run of this of my first mini series on preparing for the meta. So once again, this is Platinum Point. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and stay on point, guys. Peace out.